Breaking news out of the White House this afternoon. Jake Sullivan, National Security Advisor, announced that the United States found $300 million and they're going to give a bunch of stuff to Ukraine. So we're going to get into that in a minute, and where he explains where this money magically came from. You can decide whether that sounds plausible or not. It doesn't to me, but we'll discuss that in just a second. But what he says in his explanation for where this money came from, but mostly what it's going to do with it and how it's going to be used, combined with something the director of CIA, Burns, said yesterday, just continues this really troubling trend of just something near delusion by our senior leaders. And listen, this is something that has real consequences. And I'm going to play you a bit of a show we did earlier last week, toward the end of last week, with investor David Sachs, who we were talking about some of the issues related to the Ukraine war. And we talked about some of these issues there. He had an interesting comment where he says that he's going to go out on a limb and say that he believes that the Afghan, forgive the Freudian slip, the obvious for reasons, but he says that the Ukraine military, he believes, could collapse sometime this summer. He said he was going to go out on a limb. And I asked him, why did you think that? And he gave me this answer.
I don't know what form the collapse will take. I don't know if it'll be a toppling of Zelensky's regime in Kiev or whether it'll be a military collapse, but I think there'll be some type of collapse. And the reason I say that is I have a lot of experience with enterprises that fail and, being an investor in very risky startups and companies. And the difference between an enterprise that sort of fizzles out, kind of fails that way, versus one that has a sudden collapse is the element of delusion. The more delusional the people involved are, the more likely it is to collapse. Because what happens is they don't read all of the data points that are coming at them and they don't adjust their strategy. And so they run into a wall at 100 miles an hour.
So from someone who has made billions of dollars looking at organizations and groups and entities and other enterprises and has a really good grasp of what works and what doesn't, he says that when you're delusional about an outcome, you set yourself up for real failure. Now, that is alarming when you consider that it is our government, not just some enterprise, that has these delusional viewpoints. And if you think I'm exaggerating here, let's take a look, first of all, at where Jake Sullivan just moments ago said where this money came from.
On behalf of President Biden, I'm announcing an emergency package of security assistance of $300 million worth of weapons and equipment to address some of Ukraine's pressing needs. This is possible because of unanticipated cost savings in contracts that DoD negotiated to replace equipment we've already sent to Ukraine through previous drawdowns. When we sent Ukraine weapons last year, we negotiated contracts to replenish those weapons in U.S. stockpiles. We budgeted the full amount of appropriated funds for those contracts. It turns out we negotiated well. Those contracts came in under budget, so we have a modest amount of funding available. And to put a fine point on it, we're able to use these cost savings to make this modest amount of new security assistance available right now without impacting U.S. military readiness.
Yeah, I ain't buying it. Since when does the U.S. government, and especially DOD, come in under budget on anything? I mean, look, folks, I used to work in the Pentagon for years. I did during the right before and after the Iraqi invasion that we had in 2003. So I've seen it. I've been in our acquisition programs where we were trying to get large scale new modern fleets of various different vehicles. And I saw firsthand with my own eyes very painfully that everything came in over budget. And there's not been a program I've seen that DOD didn't just blow through the top. Now, all of a sudden, we're being asked to believe that the DOD came in under budget on some issues, and suddenly $300 million just became available. And so now we're going to use it to give them. So that's the first point. So I'm really skeptical. Now, I want to see the paperwork. So you show me where this actually happened from people who can actually understand how all this stuff works. Maybe it's true. I don't know. I haven't seen it, so I can't say. I suppose it is theoretically possible. Let's just call me very, very skeptical on this. But that's not the delusional part. The delusional part follows after that. Now, let's take a look at what he tells us this money is going to be used for.
This emergency package that we're announcing contains a large tranche of artillery rounds and GMLRS for the HIMARS. It is assistance that Ukraine desperately needs to hold the line against Russian attacks and to push back against the continuing Russian onslaught. This ammunition will keep Ukraine's guns firing for a period, but only a short period. It is nowhere near enough to meet Ukraine's battlefield needs, and it will not prevent Ukraine from running out of ammunition in the weeks to come.
So you're just going to come up with some number of artillery shells. Didn't say where it came from. So we magically have 300 million bucks to use. So the only place, well, I mean, are you going to go to Costco, Sam's Club or something? I mean, where are you going to get this artillery shells from? Well, there's only one place that they're going to get it from, and that's from our inventories. So that means that the shells that were already at a very low, critically low, according to some U.S. government officials in 2020, late 2022, by the way. So we can only imagine what it is now. You're going to raid our inventories and take them even further down because there's no other place to get them. We already know that we've cut contracts to expand our capacity to make artillery rounds, and by 2025, it'll be about a third of the daily needs of Ukraine. That won't do anything to replace our own inventories, or else it will do very little to help them other ways around. So there's no good path on this. But look, let's look at what this does. He's claiming this will actually do something to help push back the Ukraine on the tactical battlefield right now. That's nonsense. The disparity is already off the charts. By many accounts, Russia's firing about 10,000 shells per day, and Ukraine is firing between 3 or even 2 in some areas of the front already. Having a handful of shells, which is what this will result in, that would be dispersed along a 600-mile front where there's at least 5 major contact areas right now, is not going to do anything to the tactical advantage at all. I mean, you would have to have a massive influx to even come close to bringing parity for a short period of time. So Jake Sullivan is delusional if he thinks that this is going to have any impact on the tactical ground. And that's what they're saying. And you heard him with your own ears there. That's what he said. Well, maybe it's on the strategic level that what we need. And that's what Director Burns said yesterday in congressional testimony. He's suggesting that if we get this money that the Congress has not passed yet, this $60 billion, even that might do something.
I think down one road with supplemental assistance approved by the Congress lies the very real possibility of cementing a strategic success for Ukraine and a strategic loss for Vladimir Putin's Russia. It's our assessment that with supplemental assistance, Ukraine can hold its own on the front lines through 2024 and into early 2025. Without supplemental assistance in 2024, you're going to see more of Avdiivkas. And that, it seems to me, would be a massive and historic mistake for the United States.
Let me tell you what's going to be a massive and historic mistake for the United States. To believe that this stuff that he's talking about here will have a strategic impact. Look, you would have to have massive amounts of artillery shell and other things, not just artillery, to have a tactical impact. And he's trying to sell you goods that says a strategic impact will be that somehow $60 billion will stop all the Russians on this whole 600-mile front where they're making incremental progress will suddenly stop, and the Ukraine side can hold the line for the rest of the year of 2024. But guess what that means, folks? That means that by definition that they're going to come back to you, the administration, for another tranche, probably $100 million for the next time, so that they can go on the offense in 2025. So that becomes even a hypothetical possibility. And it's not, because in order to have that, number one, as I've told you so many times, you have to have an army of trained men at multiple levels with years of experience and lots of many months of experience working together in a unified kit with a maintenance system that is filled with spare parts and trained mechanics that can keep things running long term, which they do not have and has already been identified as one of the major reasons for the failed offensive last year. So every way you want to look at this, it is delusional to think that a mere $60 billion is going to do what $200 billion didn't last year. And the other big part of that delusion is that it doesn't even look at the Russian side of the equation. This is a war, folks, and a war has two sides at least. And that's what the case is here. There's the Ukraine side with its many Hydra supporters from the West, and then there's the Russian side with its handful of supporters in the East. And what do we see on the Russian side? We see them recruiting, meaning people are volunteering in the tens of thousands per month, and their army is growing very large. You have the Ukraine side having to steal people off the streets and not coming close to covering their losses, meaning they're shrinking. You have the Russian side with a military industrial complex that is cranking into full gear and is even expanding more. And in the next year is expected to just go through the roof, up to 4 million shells per year in some estimates of what they're going to be producing. I'm sorry, they may have 4 million by the end of this year. The best at the Ukraine side and all of its allies together could be about 1.3. So 1.3 to 4.5, and that disparity will only expand in the coming year because Russia is full on domestic production. They don't have to wait for anybody else. They don't need anybody else to come with money. Will the United States commit to a multi-year, 100 billion or so every single year indefinitely for the hope that maybe the battlefield realities completely contradict thousands of years of military history and suddenly change? You see how delusional this is. It is absolutely insane that we believe this stuff. And yet here you have the director of the CIA, the national security advisor to the president of the United States, are telling you this kind of stuff. And it doesn't end with the Ukraine war. One of the reporters took the opportunity to ask Sullivan, again, this just happened moments ago, what he thought about some of the issues going on with the Israeli situation. And the delusion expands into that as well.
The president, he's really focused on the substance, on the policy, on his concern about the protection of civilians, and about Israel being able to sustain a campaign in a way that ultimately leads to an outcome in which the people of Israel are secure, Hamas is crushed, and there is a long-term solution to stability and peace in the region. He believes there is a path to do that, and that path does not lie in smashing into Rafah, where there are 1.3 million people, in the absence of a credible plan to deal with the population there. And again, as things stand today, we have not seen what that plan is.
So he wants a sustained operation that's going to bring peace to Israel and peace to Palestine, that goes through, that needs a two-state solution, which Biden himself said in the State of the Union address. And we need Netanyahu to do what we're asking. And as you've probably seen on some of our previous episodes here, he says he is not going to let anyone strong-arm him into a two-state solution. So every way you look at the Israeli leader is thumbing his nose at the United States, telling us no, that he'll do whatever he wants to do, and that Biden says there are no red lines. So when Sullivan stands up and says, yeah, the president's looking for a sustainable operation here, there is no path to a sustainable outcome that has peace for the Palestinian people. And I'll repeat here again what I say on many shows. There, without peace for Palestine and peace for Israel, there is no peace for either one of them. It's a both or a neither deal. And right now we are definitely skyrocketing toward the neither outcome. And for the president of the United States to say, and his national security advisor to enumerate, that we're looking for a plan that has no possibility of success, that just shows the level of just delusion at the highest levels of government. And look, David Sachs put it perfectly. Look, he's just giving you an honest assessment of how human affairs work out. It doesn't matter whether it's a government, a military, a business concern. Those fundamentals operate within all of them. If you're delusional about the inputs, if you don't look at the data, if you don't look at the fundamentals that underoccurred, whatever the situation is, and you put these delusional glasses on that sees it the way you want it, not the way it is, then you have disaster. With the business, it's just loss of money and a humiliation. But with the government and with the wartime, the cost is in blood, somebody's blood. And in this case, it's both blood and treasure. Our treasure, their blood. But folks, this stuff doesn't just end in Israel. It doesn't just end in the Ukraine. We keep going down this path here. It's going to have negative consequences, severe consequences for our own country. It is going to gut our ability to have any influence around the world with either our friends or our allies, because I assure you that this level of delusion is not just coming from somebody like me who's doing this analysis, but our friends and our adversaries are paying a great deal of attention to how we're doing here. And our allies and our friends are probably getting alarmed, and our adversaries are probably looking at ways that, I wonder if there's any way we can exploit this to our benefit. I hope they don't find it, but that's just an unsubstantiated hope, because the likelihood is that they will, because they are always looking for ways to undercut us. And if we don't maintain our moral and emotional power on top of our military and economic powers, if we don't maintain all of that so that we have intellectual capacity to do the right thing, to recognize reality and how things work and how things don't work, if we can't do that, then God only knows what could happen to us in the future. Because these things, especially when you're talking about wars, they can expand. And if you have to make smart decisions about how to contain wars, and you have this kind of mentality, it's not hard to figure that one of these days you're going to make a major miscalculation that's going to harm all of us. And wars, as we've seen this one in Russia, we've definitely seen it in the Israeli situation here. Once they start, they take on a life of their own, and they rarely go according to anyone's script. It is crucial and vital for our national interest that we get a handle on these problems, even in this late hour, while there's still at least a shot at preventing the worst outcomes. Because if we don't, it's going to be something that our children are going to be paying for a long time. We'll leave it there for now. But as these things continue to unfold, you can count on Daniel Davis Deep Dive to keep you appraised of breaking information when it happens, to giving you the context so that you understand the reality and you're not caught blindsided when some of these things, if they play out the way we're talking about now. We will see you tomorrow on Daniel Davis Deep Dive. I ask you to like and subscribe and share with some of your friends so you can keep getting this information. And we'll see you tomorrow on Daniel Davis Deep Dive.